So, we have officially had the enhanced games happen. Was that a good idea? Not really. Did we learn anything important? Learn any lessons, any takeaways from this? Probably not. There is a quote from Hegel which says essentially that the one thing that we learn from history is that we do not learn from history at all, which I think is a very, very valid truth. And I think this particularly applies to the enhanced games. So for those that don't know, the enhanced games, the whole concept of it was, hey, we're going to put this on. It's going to be this big spectacle. It's going to be the Olympics, except anyone can juice as much as they want. Anyone can take whatever performance-enhancing drugs they like. The only obvious stipulation there is that you have to disclose how much you're taking. The idea being, hey, we're gonna take the gloves off. We're gonna show you performances that have never been seen before. We're gonna show you all kinds of crazy stuff. You're gonna really see the limits of human performance. It's gonna be so cool. It's gonna be so exciting, etc. And that is the premise, right? This does kind of call to mind the whole origin of strongman. So the whole sport of strongman, the whole idea of it originally was that it was going to be this media spectacle, right? They were going to take athletes from all these other sports, bodybuilding, powerlifting, etc., and you're going to have them compete against each other to see who is truly the strongest by putting them into events, situations that they could not prepare for, that are not part of their normal training. Well, that worked to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, strongman, it's still around. It's certainly not a mega popular sport or anything like that. But really the thing that happened is that people adapted to that format. So essentially, people started training specifically for strongman. They started specifically, getting the kinds of equipment that you could get to train for the kinds of events that they were putting on. And of course, they stopped getting, I would say, particularly good at coming up with new stuff. So the end result was just that they ended up kind of formalizing it into specific sets of events that tend to happen a lot, and people train for those specific events. And as a result, it's just another sport now. It's not really a spectacle, right? Well, the enhanced games, you could say something very similar about that in the sense that, it was maybe invented as a spectacle, but fundamentally what's going to happen is that people are going to adapt to that spectacle and around the assumptions of that spectacle, and it's going to stop being a spectacle. So what ended up really happening is that we got a lot of results that I think you would expect if you're a person like me, if you're somebody who's relatively in the know, but that might surprise you if you are not. Which is to say that basically there were not really that many real records set. There were a lot of wins that were made by people who were not enhanced. People who were opting not to compete enhanced in the enhanced games still won a lot of the cases. In some cases, it was like, hey, we set a world record, but the only reason we set a world record is because it was the previous world record holder with, like a slightly banned suit or whatever that gives you, like plus 2 seconds or whatever, plus, 0.2 of a second or whatever on your runtime, that sort of thing. Like, it was not really like, hey, the gloves are off, but it was really, hey, it was actually really disappointing. Almost no real records were set, and a lot of the non-enhanced competitors beat the enhanced competitors. And I think probably the most ridiculous one is this guy who was like a really big swimming athlete, and he took a bunch of steroids and he got super jacked, obviously. But that did not really make him a better swimmer, which I think a lot of people could have probably told you, like muscle mass is not really how you win when it comes to swimming. But the guy did it anyway, and so he looks really nice. He looks really big and really jacked. But kind of disappointing from a swimming perspective. So here's the reality that a lot of people don't really want to talk about, which is that when it comes to steroids, there's so much misinformation out there that functionally everyone believes one of two things. Basically, implicitly or explicitly, most people believe one of two things. They either believe that for the most part, the upper echelons of sport are mostly clean in a lot of sports, and mostly, the systems in place to prevent doping and to prevent performance-enhancing drug usage are, just generally effective. And so as a result, what you see in the Olympics is basically just, all the natty people. And then on the other hand, you believe, some people who believe that basically everyone is juicing all the time, and that's it. The reality is that actually, in some sports, that is the case. So in some sports, for example, like you take someone who's an endurance runner, like, are they going to be on a ton of steroids? Like, probably not, because that is not beneficial for their sport. You take somebody who is an elite bodybuilder, that person's probably on every steroid known to man. That's just because that is how it works. Different performance-enhancing drugs have different effects for different sports, and so obviously you'll get different benefits out of it. And so, for example, steroid usage is going to be very important in sports where your only goal is to build a lot of muscle mass, like in bodybuilding, but not so much in a lot of other sports, including basically any sport that has an endurance component. It has a smaller effect for strength than a lot of people would tend to think, because your muscle mass is not necessarily stronger when you build more of it. Like when we're talking about pure performance, not just building muscle mass, the PEDs tend to have a smaller effect than people think in a lot of cases. And further, and most importantly, I would say that the thing that people don't get is that there are some people out there that are just genetic freaks. Like, there are genuinely some people who are competing at the most elite maximum level of sport who are probably not doing anything at all. And that's just the reality of the situation, because we already know that there is a massive, like 250% difference in terms of just like how adaptable people are to exercise. You take 1,000 people, you put them on the exact same program. One person is going to be, mega jacked, mega strong. And, one person is going to be, basically no results. And most people are going to fall somewhere in the middle. The reality is that genetics are a huge, huge factor, like way, way bigger than anything else. And they're such a big factor that there are most likely a lot of people out there who are, like just on nothing. They're just natty and they're just setting world records. That said, the other thing is that there are a lot of people who were effectively probably cheating anyway. There were a lot of people who were probably already juicing. For a really good example, everyone's favorite powerlifter, strongman Thor, decided to try and set his deadlift world record, beating his previous deadlift world record, and he failed on the platform, even though obviously he, reported, all the stuff he was using. Do you think that he set his previous world record natty? Probably not, right? He was probably just hiding it before, and now he's probably not, right? So that doesn't change anything either. Like, functionally, you get a lot of people who were already juicing who are just like, well, this is just an excuse to not have to jump through any hoops to hide it at all. And so the enhanced games doesn't necessarily change anything, right? Like, it doesn't change the landscape. It's not like you had everyone was refusing to use PEDs and now everyone is. It's going to be a selection of people who are, probably either already using PEDs and thus, are just like, great, like I just now don't have to hide it. Or, some people who, maybe were not the best genetically and they're just looking for an excuse. And I think that's really the crux of it. I think someone pointed out a really good point, which is that a lot of the people competing in these games are not necessarily people who are at the height of their sport. They may be people who were second, third, fourth, fifth, type people, or they might be that they were previously really good, but now they're getting older. And so they're really just looking for some, effort to get relevant, right? And I think that that's all reasonably fine. But I think that, again, like if you go into this with the idea that the enhanced games are going to be about taking the gloves off and sort of, telling it like it is and all of that, it's just going to be the exact same performance as it always is. Just now we're admitting that we're using PEDs instead of hiding it. Or now we're admitting that we're natty instead of hiding it. Like, that's all there is to it at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't really change the playing field. It doesn't really change the equation. And so the idea that the enhanced games would be something new or something different is, it's certainly a little more honest. It's still a little bit more open about the reality of the situation, and that's cool. But again, I think that the writing was probably on the wall for most people who are really into fitness and sport for a long time anyway. So, it doesn't change much for me. Does it maybe open up the eyes of some normies about, the effect of steroids and PED usage in sport? Maybe a little bit, hopefully. But again, like I said, the thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history, so who knows? Maybe we won't learn anything. I think the other thing that really rubs me the wrong way about this is the relationship that Bryan Johnson has to the Enhanced Games. So, for those of you who don't know, Bryan Johnson, famous billionaire who decided that he was going to spend a lot of money trying to live forever. That's his whole shtick. I've done quite a few videos on him before. They tend to get a certain amount of attention and draw a lot of his fanboys because he has quite a few of them. So Bryan Johnson is a tech mogul, former Mormon, who just decided that he really wants to focus on living forever. And so he does all kinds of stuff that he thinks is about life extension. I've talked a lot previously about how I don't think that's really the case at all. He's mostly just testing, completely unverified technologies. He's testing, completely unvalidated methods that, might maybe extend his life a little bit, but, they don't really address the core issue, which is that, he's doing all this stuff that, sort of treats the effects of aging, but he's not literally making his cells younger or age slower. He's just, exercising and eating right and doing all kinds of weird therapies and so on. And I think also I've talked a lot in the past about how his performance of this stuff really reads more like somebody who is trying to build an online audience and trying to show off the stuff that he's doing than he is necessarily really trying to do real science. Because if he was trying to do science, it'd be very simple. He would, fund a study, he'd get, thousands of people to test out these different methods, and then it would say, okay, well, we did find out that this method, does whatever for, increasing your lifespan or making you healthier or whatever. And then, we'd have some advances in the fields of, aging science, and that'd be great, and we'd be able to apply that to everybody. He's not doing that. He's just treating himself as a guinea pig for all kinds of unverified experiments. He's just kind of doing all kinds of stuff. He is kind of assuming that that's making him healthier or that's, extending his life. I mean, I don't think it is. I think he looks like he's aging at the same speed as the rest of us, and I think he's gonna, probably die at a relatively normal age. So, at the end of the day, is he doing stuff that is probably helping him to live longer? Certainly. Is he going to live forever? Is he, cracking the secrets for what needs to be done to extend your life for a very long time or potentially permanently? Not really. He's not really going about it in a scientific way at all. So I don't think that's really going to happen. Also, he's also run into some other controversial stuff. So essentially he, left his wife, left his former family. A lot of his videos, especially early on, were trying to be about sort of like his relationship with his son and trying to reconnect with his son and like have stuff to do with his son, which I think is fine. But again, it doesn't really read like, hey, I'm a person who's really trying to live forever. It reads more like, hey, I'm a guy who's trying to, have reasons to interact with my son, which is fine. After that, he had a relationship where he was with a woman. He ended up hiring her to work for his company. He ended up firing her while she had cancer, which she took him to court over because she felt that was, inappropriate. And so there was some controversy there. He's kind of done since then a bit of a, I don't know, like a heel turn, but like he initially came off as really weird, right? Like he made all these videos about trying to live forever and everyone was like, this is really weird, dude. Like, it's not working. You just kind of look like a ghoul, etc. And he's kind of turned, public sentiment around a little bit just because he's been kind of funny on Twitter and like that's kind of worked for him. He's relatively lighthearted about it. He makes jokes about it. And so people have kind of come around on him a bit. I think the thing that is most telling is how much he's a supporter of the Enhanced Games or how his relationship has been to the Enhanced Games. Because the Enhanced Games are ultimately about performance and they are ultimately about using often unsafe methods for improving your performance so that you can set records, which is, directly in contradiction with his lifestyle of, hey, you're not training to set records, you're training for longevity, right? Like you're training to live forever. And I would say that if he was earnest in that belief, then he would be totally against this. Because we know there are so many things, there are so many negative health effects to steroids and to a lot of the performance-enhancing drugs that people take to perform better. There are a lot of people who die at young ages, particularly bodybuilders, of heart attacks just because they're taking so much of this stuff that it just totally fries, their body. Like, they die young because it's not healthy to do this. The fact that Bryan Johnson is out here associating with the enhanced games at all, first off, and in a positive way is really shocking to me. And again, I think betrays a lot of what he's about. I don't really think he's about the longevity thing. I don't even think he's about, really like extending longevity for other people or advancing the science at all either. I think he's mostly out here just to sort of perform and to build a social media following and seem cool. And I think that that's really what a lot of this is about for him, because I struggle to find a reason that he would willingly associate himself with this event if he was honest about his ideals. That's really like the long and the short of it. So at the end of the day, are the enhanced games the future of sport like they claim? Not at all. They are, if anything, they're just the exact existence of the present of the sport with, again, maybe a little bit more honesty on top. But that's really all there is to it, and I don't think that the honesty is needed. I don't think it adds anything to the mix. I don't think it adds anything to the equation. I don't think it changes anything. At the end of the day, the people who set world record performances in sport are always going to the people who are most genetically gifted or the people who are willing to take the most drugs and, cut the most corners to do that. And there's just a lot of chance involved, right? Like, at the end of the day, you can't pick your parents. You cannot out-train bad genetics. And that is the factor that is really at play here. There's no amount of, taking the gloves off on the PEDs that's going to change the genetics of the people who are participating at the end of the day. Kind of pointless, kind of a big waste of money. It's a big spectacle, a little bit of a positive maybe for some of the people who participated in it and got like their own, got something out of it, like, won or set some records or what have you. But in general, like, I don't foresee this really sticking. I don't foresee this becoming a big thing in the future. I mean, we have things like, if we talk about like relatively recent developments in sport, things like high rocks, things like CrossFit, even things like strongman are relatively new in sport. And then there's, of course, also just the way that people have changed their preferences, things like powerlifting, which used to be a lot less interesting to people, and I would say has had a bit of a resurgence in the last 10, 20 years. People's tastes change. The enhanced games doesn't bring anything new to the equation. It's not a new sport. It's not a new way of doing things. It's just the same old thing. It's just the same thing again, and I don't think that changes. I don't think that means anything. That's all for today's video. As always, if you like the video, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash the notification bell. Direct any hate mail down below. Have a good one, and I will talk to you all next time.